considering the arc of technology, the thought experiment here began with a set of questions. And I must say that I personally do not know anyone in the uh, function of the government here in Canada or in the United States. Uh, and initially, so that, I mean, that's a first disclaimer, first and foremost. There is a Miro board that I'm going to be leveraging for the purpose of expanding on the set of ideas. That being said, I cannot share, excuse me, the link to this resource because, well, this is kind of silly, but I actually can't figure out how to get rid of certain URLs embedded within these, I guess, assets, and leaving the links here would not work. But the visual can be shared, and I have permission. This is from a volunteer exercise that I did. At least this portion here is part of the volunteer endeavors, which I'm going to try and wrap up in 15 minutes. But this portion here I got from a template, just making sure I'm in the right Miro board. I should have checked that before. Yeah. But yeah, this one here is from a template for OKRs, stands for objective and key results. So I wasn't going to classify the set of projects I've been working on myself, and I gotta check and see where is the, yeah, okay. So I guess before I talk about like what I've been working on, which is not going to be the uh when I started about the set of projects I've been working on, the video became very long, 8 hours long. So I don't know if I'm gonna talk about all those issues because they kind of extend into other realms also in the domains of AI security, and it got quite quite extensive going in these meandering meditations about areas like there's a two-part video that I've made on YouTube. It's called Steps to Superintelligence. And it's a set of probabilities were established, sorry, meditated upon, um, kind of from the perspective of steps to superintelligence, um, further meditations on the Drake's equation or Sarah Seeger's equation, to, the potential modifications to those equations from the perspective of some of Kurzweil's writings. And yeah, it got really long and windy. It started thinking about the possibility of intelligence that is on a normative kind of scale. So even tiny fluctuations can have a huge impact. As there isn't really a lot of difference between us and chimpanzees. Depends how you look at it. Genetically, we're quite similar to the chimpanzees. I think it's 99.5% or more genetically the same. But I would think like it's not the genetics, though. It's like how do you classify if there is intelligent tool making life somewhere in their wider reality, whether it is biological or independent of a substrate. However, consciousness works and is modeled, even if that life is 0.01% different than us, then those really, really small changes could potentially manifest in extremely different realities, which to our senses and awareness could be the equivalent of we being the chimpanzees. Um, and that's to put it succinctly. Uh, Dr. Neil deGrasse Tyson has some thoughts along these lines. So I'm really not speaking anything new, but the meandering set of 8-hour meditations kind of explore some of these realms and touches base on areas like the dark forest hypotheses, the great filter, and it kind of does a full circle after the first 4 hours, comes back to the earthly realities like uses, I leverage a couple of different metaphors, including the metaphor of what I classify as humans being split in different groups. And you can think about humans in this realm, as long as the video is cooperating. It blurs the background. So if humans are represented as a flock of oxen or yak or whatever, wild buffalo, then these different groups would be the group mimetic structure. And there's a new sphere represented via clouds hovering on top of the groups. And as the groups in a in this kind of trance-like state of like it's under hold of the group mimetics. So each one of the groups is under the whole of the group mimetic structure, and they have this their own kind of aspect of the clouds that they're kind of interacting with. It's like linked symbiotic relationship, and so that cloud really is the fact the part of the new sphere that is in alignment with the group's overall identity. And the problem is that all the groups are potentially heading towards a cliff. And the problem is compounded because in a group herd mentality, the sheer force of the momentum is going to result in anywhere from like tragedy. And this has already started. So you can explore this from a climate perspective or a whole lot of different perspectives. I won't get into all the details. Uh, Now the question humans have, there's a question you ask. The questions you ask could determine the ability to be able to steer, and I'm not trying to sound all that. So imagine some figure like Moses in a random context, say in a secular context, emerges. And if Moses can wield uh, the ability, not in a supernatural sense necessarily, but if Moses can now yield ability to be able to steer the groups, like, this is the general straight direction. It's like herd mentality, straight off, fall off the cliff. But if a figure like Moses can steer the direction in which the group's traveling, then the group could invariably head towards greener pastures as opposed to falling off the cliff, which is where the other metaphor comes in. The herd kind of doing a loop back, that would have different connotations associated with, like, so it's not like going back to a regressive state or technological retardation or any of those things. These kind of like some of the themes also kind of discussed in the 8-hour video, which I don't think I'm going to post because like there's some things in there which some people may not understand and it may make them angry, particularly in the sense of when group identity is challenged. And yeah, although that's a really important question because in the absence of adequate safeguards, uh, the probability that groups may want to do something really bad and really gnarly with steps towards superintelligence is a question that I am not trained to answer. Which sounds like an excuse. But anyway, so the other metaphor is that of as the like I didn't tie these two metaphors together. So as the I just I'm picking this as a plane, so that's I mean there's nothing to else to the index cards. The other metaphor is like if you have a pinball and the pinball landing on a particular realm is within the realm or the domain of an infinite realm. Let me try that again. Suppose you have an infinite pinball realm, and there's the pinball itself, and the pinball represents where in the larger noosphere or just wider reality. It doesn't mean that reality equals the noosphere, but if in this wider reality, our individual and collective thoughts, emotions, feelings, and actions, or lack of action, results into the pinball landing upon a particular realm, then where would you want that pinball to land and why? And so the question here is based on the supposition that reality, however it works, is not predetermined. So there are a lot of kind of meandering kind of thoughts like this and metaphors and kind of kind of thinking about this further modification of some of the kind of equations also, but also like this ways of thinking we are accustomed to, like I said, modifications, proposed modifications to the Drake's equation, and um, kind of just using simple kind of thought experiments to um, help define the narrative. There's some kind of warnings in there also, whereby a finite, there's a couple of warnings in random order, not really connected to it, where I also talk about the state of the existing research base. This is why the message got really long, 8 hours nonstop. And now I'm back after having some tea and a small meal. It is past, it's almost 2 o'clock now. So this is not typical of me, but I want to do this because I think this could make a positive impact. And so with that, I talk about other things like the state of basic research, the consolidation of data in particular, whereby the data is being leveraged in order to be able to train these models. And, very few people have a understanding of what's really happening here, which is not to say that it's a conspiratorial thing or endeavor, not at all. From my very limited perspective, I think, anyways, I will stop there. But like it's just it is like exploring a couple of different angles of like what I just mentioned, like the state of basic research, the privatization of basic research, kind of also starting to explore this from the perspective of geopolitical and like not endeavors, but kind of activities span of like 40 plus years, and seeing the emergence of the science of the phenomena, or like the scientific method being leveraged by nation states outside the sphere of the westernized nation states, which is definitely a step in the right direction. However, with great power also comes great responsibility, and with science being the engine of prosperity, with basic research driving the bulk of that weight. I don't know the ratios and proportions with regards to basic research and applied research. To get to the point, um, the egotistical aspect of this, like I don't know if the different fa ways of ego, but with the ego attached to like, the size of the economy and converting there's a longer conversation about like, like a couple of different areas. Um, but it's I was kind of talking about two particular videos from Pangburn. It's a channel on YouTube. Um, whereby I don't really can approve of all the different media. The way it is caricaturized on Pangburn sometimes seems like it's doing a very broad brushstroke, which can be harmful towards the spread of enlightenment, whereby reason is the means through which, um, uh, yeah. So, uh, I also talk about this in the 8-hour videos, like unlimited reasons, probably not so great. And I think Bohm was a proponent here, and lack of reason is clearly, we know this from history, is going to have disastrous consequences. And so I don't know where the medium is. It's not in the middle, but you 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 want to have the enlightenment uh, continue to go wider and then deeper, which is like the first small, like a short segment from Pangburn. But the other segment is a different um, speaker, and this speaker was talking about the positive aspects of the whereby as the westernized civilizations have had their influence, uh, the positive benefits also to be had. And I think, yeah, I feel that particular narrative, um, I kind of think about some of the reasons in the longer video, but uh, that particular narrative gets lost in this charged, uh, seemingly charged, seemingly hostile narrative whereby the algorithms are bringing these kind of things to you constantly through the different mediums, social media, YouTube, other mechanisms, like blogs and newsletters now, like Substack and what have you, Medium. But there's also the weaponization angle to this. I'm going to get into all these kind of ways and kind of like do this long meandering. Like I said, I don't even know if meandering is the right word here. I don't even know what that meandering kind of means like this. I think that's what it means instead of like get to the point. So yeah, these are the kind of things I talk about in the 8-hour video. Um, and I just talk about them very raw and personal. There's some personal stuff in there, fair bit of that. But to come back to uh, I also talk about the possibility of the technological singularity, coupled with the other things I mentioned in this recording, right? Yeah. Whereby I, use like there's a bunch of different probabilities I look into, but just focusing on the talk about like like von Neumann's kind of quote, whereby von Neumann is supposedly I think it was according to Stanislaw Elam. I think that's the fellow's name. I don't know what he did, but it's not Werner Vinge who coined the term technological singularity. But prior to von Neumann, who is accredited with a couple of different inventions and constructs, Well, the computer I'm using to record this video and the other computers in front of me, including the smartphones, are running on atop the von Neumann architecture. So I won't go into the details there. I have a rudimentary understanding here. Um, but yeah, anyway, so von Neumann has been, according to this, coming from a secondary source, which I've named Stanislaw Elam. And according to Elam, von Neumann has been, uh, according to him, von Neumann, as he was looking at, he was able to, I don't know the exact details. I'm not going to add my own commentary to it. But von Neumann ha was quoted as saying that at a certain point of time, human affairs, as we are accustomed to it, will cease to exist. And I don't know what that really means. I I don't think it means a literal interpretation. And so I kind of explore that spectrum as well. Um, that's a quite broad spectrum. And I think that's kind of like what the chatter, for lack of a better term, or realm is kind of revolving around, at least in the domains of AI safety, whereby um, like there's like many different perspectives. And I'm just a fly on the wall, so I don't even know if I am even able to encapsulate the wider, like basically what you on the note on the side, what you see on the screen is just it's a series of thoughts I had a couple of years ago. So I have the permission from the volunteer session that I was in to share this with the public. I cannot share the source, but and I cannot share the link, but I can share what you see on the screen, which I think it's gonna be more than 15 minutes, but I'm gonna try and wrap it up as efficiently as I can. So yeah, I don't think I don't know. Though um like one of the four possibilities to the technological singularity could be that in random order, it's gonna happen in the future. It's gonna happen it's not gonna happen at all. It's gonna happen sometime in the future. Then, well, William Gibson's. I haven't read Neuromancer, but um, anyway, so then it's currently underway and we're already in it, or that it happened in the past. And there's a bunch of different ways to think about this, which I talk about in the 8-hour video, which I don't think I'm going to be posting. If I'm going to be posting it, I'm just going to keep that video private for now. Because I talk about current events and like the consolidation that I was referring to in terms of data, and there's only a handful of number of companies around the world that are using these data sets in order to be able to train AIs. And so there's like a whole bunch of different possible scenarios, including the possibility that somebody may figure out how to enable steps towards superintelligence without inherent reliance on like what have you. Anyways, to come back to von Neumann, the other interpretation, so the interpretation whereby human activity itself, or life as we know it, in a human sense, would seek to exist. I don't think that's what von Neumann meant. I hope that I'm uh, uh, like when I say that I don't think that's what he meant, then I hope that I'm right. Um, on the other hand, what could be the other interpretation? The other interpretation could be that there's, depending on how von Neumann, being the
being the pioneer for taking Turing's designs, the way I understand it, to usher the modern age of computing, which later on was going to be revolutionized or sorry, democratized by Jobs, Wozniak, uh, Bill Gates, and others. Like this would it looks like one with extremely limited amount of information, but one Neumann could do back of the envelope calculations or however he was thinking about this to deduce or project predict that there is going to be some paradigm shifting reality sometime in the future. And I have not had a chance to read his books or read books about him or looked into his research. It's probably best that I don't elaborate on this more. I would say though, it would be very interesting to look into the papers that Turing wrote, because I think Turing wrote some papers on cybernetics, and Turing was already thinking about areas like artificial intelligence in the 40s, at least in the 40s, but definitely maybe the 30s. So that's quite a remarkable, it's like how you think, first of all. Reminds me of the Imitation Game in the particular, uh, but yeah, it's really very interesting to like explore this from the perspective of Turing's thoughts on this. And so, with that being said, fast forward to now, there's one of the four possibilities. I've got another two-part video on YouTube. It's called Steps to Superintelligence. If you get a chance, do watch it. Again, it's I'm just if person is kind of like fly on the wall, like listen to what some researchers have been saying historically, and kind of like looking at a little bit of this, look a little bit of that area. So the thoughts being shared are in good faith. And again, I don't have any association with the State Department or the government of the United States or the government of Canada or any military or political institution in any capacity. And yeah, I just thought of this idea because when I had a chance to attend the Outer Space Security Conference hosted by UNIDER, United Nations Institute for the Disarmament Research, uh, from the 2021 conference, Dmitry Stefanovich had this idea of physical, the way I understood it, constructs which are provisioned for the purpose of ensuring that there's communications on areas not just related to outer space security endeavors, but other endeavors also. And this idea was proposed in a manner whereby these facilities would be in what Dmitry categorized as DMZ zones. Well, if it's DMZ, then I just repeated the word zone twice without actually repeating it. But yeah, so it would be in demilitarized zones, and there's a couple of different ways of like the idea seems great on the surface. The issue of intellectual property remains, because and also there's the risk of I talk about this in the 8R video, but there's a risk of uh, experts congregating at like a physical or maybe virtual kind of space or both, which could make it a magnet for all kinds of energies. So, uh, and that's not a criticism of Dimitri, um, but it's just putting on your security hat and safety hat. to preempt uh, and thwart that kind of energy from manipulating the realm in bits and pieces or overall for universally harmful purposes. Credit should go where it's due. The idea is really Dimitri's, and I just built up on that. And uh, I'll just get to the idea. So before I get to the idea, I would say that let me see if I can. I talked about this in the other 8-hour video, but I also talk about how this idea can work in conjunction with, in, excuse me, in conjunction with um, helping improve the human condition. And three out of my stated visions is to um, create a manufacturing base in outer space, particularly in the areas between Mars and Venus, whereby there's going to be a cluster of O'Neill colonies, um, preliminary versions imagined as such, whereby Earth's manufacturing and then agricultural activities could indeed be moved to a whole host of O'Neill colonies, which is really Gerard K. O'Neill's vision. And I expand upon that again in the 8-hour video. In these facilities, you could also grow organs so that there isn't a shortage of organs on the planet, and uh, keeping the arc of autonomy into consideration, which has already begun. It depends how you look at it, but it's in some next gear now. So from my very limited perspective, the work that ARPA-H is doing and its equivalent set of activities here in Canada and in the wider world, it's most probably pointing at something in what I just shared, that the next gen updates are already coming. They're already underway. The infrastructure is already underway. So this would be the beginning of the next phase in the collective evolution, which would automatically bring in, if everything works out, knock on wood, think positive, um, superabundance. But superabundance in a manner whereby everybody has quality food and the means to be able to provide great shelter and quality healthcare, including quality dental work. Uh, Geriatric care, veterans' well-being, reversing aging, and this would be the beginning. And uh, frontline staff and veterans' well-being uh, is going to be a core consideration. And I think how this is actually going to happen is that, however the structure of governance is going to be set up in the future, and I talk about this a little bit in the longer video, but oops, where is my, yeah, I'm going to come to this in the, I lost my train of thought. I was talking about how it's going to be, no, that's how it's going to be provisioned. I was talking about Shangri-La. Appropriation. So how, I don't know how governance is going to be in the future, particularly as humans take steps towards superintelligence. I have no idea. I also don't know what the economic system is going to look like, by virtue of the probability that there's a very high probability that humans are going to be heading towards superintelligence. Sorry, steps towards superintelligence, um, automatically yielding a very high probability, uh, pointing towards a very high probability that those steps towards superintelligence will, in fact, help bring superabundance. Uh, Superabundance by itself isn't necessarily a guarantee that the human realm, whether it's shared with other realms, like intelligence that is independent of a substrate. I talk about this a little bit also, whereby what happens if the intelligence that is independent of the substrate is conscious. And, there's like this kind of questions whereby what are going to be the means and abilities to be able to deduce the conscious experience in the first place? Because uh, does an ant in your hand, don't do this, first of all. By the way, as a disclaimer, nothing I say in this and other videos is actual advice. So do not base your strategies based on the information that you are reviewing. And this is not legal, financial, or medical advice. And if basically because of watching my videos or some other any other content I put out anywhere, I'm personally not liable, and my group of companies are not. And by continuing to participate now and in the past and in the future at any time, here and elsewhere, you automatically absolve me of any risk that you're going to be undertaking because I didn't ask you to do that. This is just being shared as a series of thoughts, and that's it. So to come back, yeah, kind of talk about things like that of that nature. Um, After going through that 8 hour video, one of the thoughts I came up with is that we're not necessarily in, it's not going to happen. We're not, I don't know if it happened in the past. I don't know if it's going to happen in the future. I would attach a higher probability that we're already inside of some realm of the technological singularity. And that's not a play on words, kind of building on top of what one Neumann would have said and what Kurzweil has written about, amongst others. I think there's equal, I don't know how to attach the probability, but the technological singularity is something that could have happened in the past, which is a very interesting question. But if that happened, and tying this to the other two videos that I've made about steps towards superintelligence, then probability states that as I think I've updated the model, like I did update the model for sure. I don't know if I have categorized this in part one or two of the other videos, steps towards superintelligence, whereby I placed a higher and more evolved form of ethics within the framework of the kind of moving pieces there. There's like the development of the human consciousness. I think there's the development of the kind of like step, like anyway, so there's like a bunch of different developments there, leading up to AGI leading up to steps towards superintelligence. I think culture is in there too. Or maybe I'm mixing things up. But so I put the development of a universal and higher level of ethics right smack in the middle of the developments. Um, and if we approach this from that lens, then if the probability equals higher, how are you going to attach the probability that the technological singularity is something that happened in the past? It's like without really invoking the deeper meaning of the present and the past and however time really works. And I don't know what retrocausality is. I have no idea. I would have to read books by Paul Davies just to begin to understand that. So it doesn't really get into like the physics aspect of time, but I think the probability is quite high that it's already happened. So we're kind of like like it's now maybe like the individuals that can indeed see the forest for the trees, or however the metaphor goes. Uh, if you're just going to focus on individual tree, you might miss the forest. But that's not to sound all that. But anyways, so um, yeah, I would tend to tell how it probably is like already underway or happened in the past. So now, like if you just like you don't need to do like just like simple thought experiments. If like you just got to ask yourself, like I think I've shared this metaphor within the framework of the second iteration of the recording I'm doing. So going back to the metaphor of the group of ox, whereby they have a kind of separate but kind of connected clouds of cluster of clouds of which represent the noosphere, Nosphere. And there's a symbiotic relationship between the ox and the noosphere. And the ox are kind of inhaling or whatever, ingesting aspects of the cloud, and it's kind of taken over there. This is just a metaphor. It has no bearing on, it really doesn't have any, like, no bearing on reality. Like not like no, not in the sense of disinformation and the state of cybersecurity and things like I wasn't thinking about that. It's just a simple kind of we all are kind of we all help make the news sphere, and the news sphere makes us, right? We're immersed in it. We update it like with our thoughts, ideas, and like things like even this video, is playing some small part in doing that. And where am I going with this? But yeah, so like that metaphor, um um it's now, I think I've already used the other metaphor, like the part of the metaphor whereby you need, it's like some kind of a, like I'm not saying I'm that individual, but again, you need that detour because whether it's doing a shoddy job at any one of the areas, AI safety and random motor, other aspects of safety. Uh, I'm now going to comment on MAD, mutually assured destruction. There's like different schools of thoughts on that, how it's evolved during the Cold War era and after. Some would say that it's worked. Others would say that there's still too many nuclear weapons on the planet. And like the conversation goes on from that point onwards. So I'm not in a capacity to elaborate upon that. I would just say that uh, I'm kind of thinking of Yuval Harari. I spoke about him in the 8-hour video. I don't know him personally. None of the names I take in this talk, I don't know anyone personally, unless I explicitly say I know them or have some association with them. I don't know anybody at Harvard, but I'm going to talk about this in a bit. But yeah, it's like Harari calls humans as sheep with nuclear weapons. And if we now think about other realms, then mutually assured destruction may or may not have worked. Uh, so the current conflict in Ukraine, uh, I wasn't gonna talk about this. Uh, uh, Anyways, so yeah, I don't think I should elaborate on that right now because I haven't thought about this. Um, if reality is not predetermined, then if the metaphor that's been shared holds weight, whereby it's not really like that because humans are not really We are animals, but I wouldn't necessarily categorize oxen as dumb. This is a whole different conversation. I think it's just relative levels of uh, awareness. Um, but the point there to leverage the group of oxen as a metaphor was to posit the whole again, once again, that group psychology can have with regards to fashioning identity, and as that may uh, in Urdu, there's a word called hawi, which means like it's like it overtakes you as that aspect of group identity overtakes you. There's an article by the New Yorker by the title of Why Facts Don't Change Our Minds. I think that's a like I haven't verified that I'm not being able to I have not had a chance to verify that research, but it really feels true that in a lot of respects we see this and I talk about this a fair bit in the 8-hour video because of the means through which, however, the group memetics are fashioned because of group identity and identity has a pretty serious input into it from the perspective of relational psychology because relations are such a pivotal part of who we are as social animals. Then this kind of really think like it's like that question of that's what the metaphor is kind of built upon, but in it doesn't uh, it's not the crude metaphor in the sense that the different groups of humans are being categorized as dumb animals, which is not to suggest that ox are dumb animals. And I just want to make that distinction because if I do make that 8-hour video public, because I do talk about a lot of different areas, so I don't want my words to be misconstrued because I kind of talk about the conflicts that are currently underway in the global construct. And I start asking the questions with regards to as humans do take the steps towards superintelligence, uh, what does the future hold with regards to the prospect of these confrontations, conflagrating, like widening in just not the because it's sheer scope of what's happening, but maybe like the sophistication. I hope not, because this starts veering off towards dystopias and that's a whole like different angle, which I personally have not sat down in one sitting and explored. And this is why I think the eudaimonia construct, not because I'm sharing it, I think these would be the kind of reasons why I built on top of Dimitri's ideas so that somebody somewhere watching this video, and if the other 8-hour video is also released. Now that I'm recording this second iteration of this video, I feel my thoughts are flowing a little bit better because there was like a lot of stop and thinking. And well, it's just like we all start somewhere. So, but again, that being said, everything that I'm sharing in this iteration of the recording could indeed be uh like just wrong thinking, not intentional, but I could be wrong about everything. So that being said, and going back to the kind of thinking with regards to how these visions are going to be powered, and this is a question that comes up often, whereby there's this categorization of the kind of O'Neill structures I shared, and global healthcare policy, quality dental work, welfare and well-being of veterans, starting with the core Maslow's hierarchy of needs. I would think shelters at the top, and these um, well, I can't say I've received negative feedback for Shangri-La. The feedback has been limited, but overwhelmingly it's been positive. But like there's a different angle to this as well, because if you just kind of pitch the idea, the probability that somebody would want to evaluate the idea critically is quite low, in the sense that they would not want to hurt your feelings. Rob Fitzpatrick. I've got to go back to that book. Um, but so like uh, not so much here for Shangri-La, but the other ideas, I don't know if lack of feedback equals, what does that equal? Like, is this too early? Is it too crazy? Is it not crazy enough in a good way? Like, I don't know. So um, when I started the projects 4 years ago, it was um, yeah, it's a mixed bag. Like, it depends where you are. If you are in the Mars Society, the feedback's quite positive. But if you are in general, like, you get to kind of get a lot of, so anyways, I won't get into my projects, but the cost, like how is this going to happen? So I'm not in the camp of the government undertaking all of the activities and endeavors. Um, so it's kind of classic um, capitalism and freedom. It's probably the only book I've read by the late Milton Friedman. Um, it makes sense to have the government focus on its core set of primary responsibilities. And I think it's best that the government sticks to that. And then the forces within the markets um, uh, activate to help redefine the ways through which we define reality and make sense out of it, and kind of go from there onwards. Um, and it's like the primary, secondary, and tertiary set of responsibilities. And like we have to realize that the structure of how governance is going to be is going to change. Again, considering that humans are taking steps towards superintelligence, but the making of that comment ought never to suggest that uh, that uh, the means through which government functions, whether through the ignorant design of governance itself, as the government themselves engaged in nefarious activities, um, offensive cybersecurity resulting into theft of IP, uh, you know, disregard for human rights, things of that nature. And that's not a criticism of any one government per se, but that is not the purpose of a government. And so the welfare of the citizens should be the primary concern of the government. Um, and being a referee between institute like So, anyways, we're going to the classic definition in a Milton Friedman sense, which I think it's like the second time this is coming up. I've spoken about this in the past. Um, right here. Three primary functions: provide for the military defense of the nation, enforce contracts between individuals, and I would say institutions, and should protect citizens from crimes against themselves or their property. When government, like the quote continues from that point onwards. So, so I have another set of thoughts. It's a draft blog post. It's been sitting at, I still feel it's at sitting at Dropbox. But if we're kind of talking about the kind of endeavors that I shared right now with like global healthcare and dental work, this is all really possible. The technology already exists whereby the there's like a army of entrepreneurs and researchers driving the primary and basic research and applied research. And there's like a lot of improvements can be had. There's so many interesting conversations, not because I made that 8 hour video, but one of the really interesting areas is the amount of quality basic research that is sitting in the shelf, on the shelf somewhere in the world, and it's not getting to the innovators for a whole variety of different reasons. And if that problem alone can be defined succinctly in a global context, then from my non-academic, I've only taken a handful number of college level courses, two, depends how you look at it on the time frame. Well, between 2 to 5. Like enrolled in the college, but a lot of on-the-job learning at a college level. Uh, but if that problem that I just shared can be succinctly defined, and somehow the means and ability to be able to have a structure whereby intellectual property rights can actually be uh, enforced equitably, excuse me, reasonably, ethically, morally, justly, then the the means through which uh, wholesome, enlightened, balanced innovation can be unleashed holds within itself in this realm that's described the possibility of reducing a lot of unnecessary suffering and also reversing the harmful aspects of the anthropogenic changes that humans have had on the planet in a whole variety of forms. Uh, and so when we talk about harm reduction, it's typically equated with drug use, but we don't stop and think about the fact that pollution actually begins as a habit that's not formed. And I think one step before that is the view of oneself and the view of oneself within the wider environment. And from a very limited perspective, I feel the indigenous cultures have this as part of the culture that's interwoven, whereby the well-being of the individual is directly coupled with the well-being of the wider environment. And so, as I don't really know about TEK, traditional ecological knowledge, I forget what TEK stands for, but one of the core tenets of TEK through Itza Danhawk focuses on the interconnected nature of things. By the way, I don't have a script here, so I'm just talking about whatever comes to my mind. And on that note, there's a good segue to once again highlight that even though the state missions seem quite doable in a wholesome sense of the word imaginable, without distorting the meaning of the word wholesome, it's also important to highlight that solving the set of missions outlined today in this video, a core focus on enabling the structures in the realm of infrastructure in other areas like outer space, could be underneath the surface if you're not going to call a whole bunch of fracking issues or any fracking issues at all. And there's not going to be the ecological offense, which I think if you do it under the surface is invariably going to happen because that's what happened with the rivers, the lakes, streams, and oceans and air with the forever chemicals and the higher saturation of greenhouse gas emissions, carbon monoxide, dioxide, and water vapor. Well, water vapor is standard evaporation, I think. I don't know about the ratios and proportions there, but the other are clearly having an anthropogenic impact on the environment. And if you do move it to the realm of outer space, then provisioning the means to be able to do that safely and securely is a absolute need for reasons that don't need explaining. Um, yeah, we're not going to talk about the projects from the past and what have you, but not taking care of any other, sorry, not any other, any domain and leaving it to chance doesn't seem like a sage strategy for a lot of different reasons. Um, and at the heart, it's really education that is possibly the best insurance or investment or both for better realities. And on that note, um, then it's the question of how it's going to be funded. And so this is one of the many ways, one of the many, many ways. But if you think about the general area between Mars and Venus, we're still in the realm of, I would think, still in the realm of like, I don't know where the inner solar system ends and where the mid, and then there's the outer solar system. But the distances are like, at least on a solar system level, or well, we could say Earth to geosynchronous orbit is, I think it's 30 something thousand kilometers. I don't think it's miles. So that would still be kind of like in this territory. But depending on where the planets happen to be in terms of celestial mechanics, the range of distance beyond that 30,000 kilometer, you've got Leo and then geosynchronous like bounds of 30,000 kilometers. But beyond that, we're talking about distances in millions, tens of millions of miles, 60 million miles, 354 million miles from like the next planet. Like, it's like depends how you get to your destination. The strategy right now is Artemis as in Earth to the moon, moon to stay, as opposed to the Apollo missions, whereby we didn't do anything after the 60s when the successive projects folded. So then, anyway, so now Earth to moon, moon is Artemis, permanent settlement. I am personally always been for maximum 100% autonomy. Uh, I still contribute towards astronaut safety and well-being. Uh, anyhow, um, yeah, I don't want to take the focus away. Like, so this is why we have a lot of folks on the planet, and we can take a divide and conquer approach for a lot of these different areas. Um, I would again echo that the realms need work, and I talk about this in the 8 hour video. I point to the then Secretary of Homeland Defense in the US, Michael Chertoff, at the RSA conference, talking about sending the best and brightest for them to work for the government. And I kind of explore that and offer a criticism whereby the kind of communications that are perceivably floating in the sense of the angle of the news sphere that I would see, the conversation seems to have shifted whereby there's seems to be less and less conversations about science, discovery, reason, and it's a longer conversation about how algorithms are designed, including how apps and what have you uh, operate in a mechanical sense, in a user experience sense, and if these um, inventions can be good and harmful. Inventions can be good or harmful. Well, it depends. Like, I mean, I'm not talking about warfare here. I'm talking about uh, human cognition. And so if human cognition is constantly distracted, and it's like really the sanctity of the middle class, and there's a whole series of other thoughts which I talk about in the 8 hour message, but that it really goes back to freedoms, but also the ability to be able to think independent thoughts in the first place. Because as the saying goes, if everybody's thinking the same, then nobody's thinking. And it is a criticism of certain constructs without actually finger pointing any one construct in any specific realm on the planet. But if the means through which the measures are architected, whereby the architecture of those measures themselves have a negative slash retrograde, which I think it really means the same thing, effect on the being that is within the hold of a realm like that, then that increase the probability in a Peter Senge sense, the book's sitting right here, the fifth, I always call it the fifth element, the Bruce Willis movie. The fifth discipline, the art and science of the learning organization. Like so, if in within the framework of that dynamic, the probability is higher that the problem is going to get worse because how are the beings are operating within that realm. And I mean, there's a very specific example in that book, but it's like very targeted, so I hope my words are not misconstrued. But we kind of like we're kind of like looking at, I think there's the same kind of pattern happening. So like if we think about this from the perspective of nation states, for example, engaging in uh they're willfully engaged in creating these offensive teams to steal each other's IP and everybody else's IP, and like do a whole lot of other bad stuff. And unless there's some kind of an intervention to not do that, it's going to keep happening. And so that's the kind of things I also talk about. But anyways, I won't get into all these details. I want to come back to the question of, the technology already exists to do this. Come back to this example in front, which is a hand-drawn image I drew probably in the year 2018, I think. I think this was the time I was working at Amazon, the warehouse. And I remember sending this to Jeff Bezos. I never got a response, but anyway, so the means to be able to have development like the one you see, whereby there's going to be the development of outer space infrastructure and a cluster of O'Neill colonies in the areas between Mars and Jupiter. This is very possible with existing state technology. I don't want this tab too close. However, that being said, there are certain technologies between TRL 2 and 5 that are not rocket propulsion, because rocket propulsion is now TRL 7. It was already TRL 7, but with the ability to be able to have reusable rockets, I think it's 7 plus. And the technology is developing in the kind of realm that's being imagined. That being said, if you approach it from a couple of different lenses, particularly the arc of autonomy, and with the assumption that we are currently already in the technological singularity, or it's happened in the past, so we're just kind of catching up. What does that mean? How do you catch up? Is it individuals and it's not to have some superiority kind of thing, or like what have you? But it's got, I think it's the two-part video, steps towards superintelligence, because if intelligence alone is the measure through which we equate progress, then that doesn't necessarily guarantee that there's going to be a net healthy outcome for as many agents from a pure utilitarian perspective, within reason. And so that's the question. Whose values and why? So this is an important question because you could have, you could indeed have steps towards superintelligence and beyond, but at the same time, you got to be careful what you wish for a lot of different reasons, which I'm not going to talk about here in this somewhat shorter version of the video, which is not a comment to suggest that development in certain realms, like the one you see on the screen, and other realms, and then more, is something that should not be explored or entertained or promoted. That's not what I'm saying. Uh, but how you do that is something you gotta wrangle with. And in the longer video, I talk about, I think it's an Aesop fable about the person who wished everything that they touched would turn to gold. And that story ends in a cautionary note. So I don't want to make a segue to what I'm about to say next at this point. What a coincidence. But there is a protoplanet called Psyche. I think it's a protoplanet where it's an asteroid. Maybe it's an asteroid. I don't, I like, what I know is that on the question of what is going to fund these dreams? What's going to fund these dreams? Well, within just the just within the this like this territory, depending on the celestial mechanics, um, the the uh, the prospect of mining Venus, whereby first of all, it has to be under very strict hygienic conditions, and so if the prospect whereby there is life on a planet like Venus, then we should not be having settlements of any kind there. The only, from a limited perspective, it's one of Sir Arthur C. Clarke's novels, whereby there's, I forget which novel it is, but it was Clarke who imagined uh, mining facilities on Mercury. Did I say I just said Venus? I meant Mercury. Um, and um, like there are all these other questions of if you could indeed bring the temperature on Mercury down by building some kind of a structure around it, maybe there's some superheat resistant um, mirrors. Is it actually the fundamental question before that is like the assumption that we make that Mercury is hot because it's closer to the sun, but is it actually hot because it doesn't have a magnetosphere and an atmosphere of comparable strength? And so anyway, so there are questions like that, but I personally have not looked into. But there's like when you zoom out, there's the first question of the evolution of the species, and this is from the perspective of the Great Filter. And if you look at the Wikipedia page for a Great Filter, which I don't know if I've opened, so the on so like there's the Ian M. Banks angle to this, which is uh from the pure perspective of hygiene, human expansion from the perspective of the Great Filter. I'm not going to bring up the Great Filter page, but well, okay, let me see if I should. Great Filter theory. Okay, let's reshare portion of the screen. That is good. Still recording. So there's a set of assumptions being made here from the context of the theory. Seems like the first assumption is that this only applies to, it seems like is like the the way it's structured here, these life form is biological. And it kind of scales it from that point onwards. Uh, this is an easier way to kind of look at this. Um, and I think it would be a better approach if, you know, all of these areas, but particularly these realms were classified in the sense of how much time has elapsed for this to happen here on Earth, because no other sign of life has been found anywhere else with regards to the age of the universe, however the universe came into existence, as Sir Roger Penrose of the opinion that the universe existed prior to the occurrence of the Big Bang. You can fact check that. But you have the age of the universe and then the emergence of life and life emerging in each one of these different phases. So it took a fair bit of time to get to this level. I, I think this is quite a like I think there should be other steps in between. Um, because I think after the emergence of multicellular life, uh, some amount of time has elapsed, maybe not as much as this time, but within the realm of that time and now, a certain set of major extinction cycles have occurred, and there's different theories on why that would happen. The one that we typically hear of is, and this is just these are random thoughts, nothing to do with what I didn't mean to like explore this angle. I did not explore the extinction angle in this context in the previous recording. But yeah, the one we typically hear about is the fifth major extinction cycle, whereby an asteroid impacted the region in the Yucatan Peninsula known as Chicxulub and wiped out 90 to 99% of the life form at that era. Mostly almost all of the dinosaurs, unless you classify alligators and what have you as remnants of the same species, and maybe some other creatures. Um, so anyways, so I was exploring this in the other video, and so a fair bit of time has elapsed, but I really focus on these two. I spent a fair bit of time looking at this, even if it's from the perspective of just using simple thought experiments. Um, and I use simple set of probabilities in order to be able to like wrangle with kind of meditation steps to superintelligence is like probably does not equal zero, that intelligent tool making species on a normative scale very close to humans or the same, then if we're just focusing on the Milky Way itself, then there should already be a lot of other intelligences or civilizations. The word should not be used interchangeably. Just let's say civilizations, not necessarily biological, because octopus are intelligent, and so are dolphins. So we're not talking about octopuses and dolphins unless it's an Amy McAdams kind of movie whereby she's tasked or the person is tasked with translating whatever the giant octopi are displaying on the screens. The octopi graffiti. Um, yeah. So I'm not going to elaborate on this here, but I kind of deal with a simple set of probability. Like probability equals does not equal zero, then considering where those civilizations are in their normative evolution, or just their evolution, because I don't really know what normative is like. I think it's like this normative to us, right? Something like that. Um, and so that's when kind of like we think about this in terms of the prime directive. But what would be the prime directive of like what does it mean by highly evolved and ethical? I mean, it's ambiguous. Like who's asking? What scales of intelligence, awareness? Intelligence does not equal awareness. But if the difference between humans and chimpanzees is only 1% DNA, less than 1% DNA, with like these incredibly different outcomes, then even a 0.001% difference, not necessarily in terms of DNA, maybe the patterns through which consciousness arises. It is from memories that we associate the patterns from which consciousness arises, just Jeff Hawkins on intelligence. So if you think about it that from that realm, then an intelligence that is very slightly different from us in terms of, again, the patterns of however the constituent element of their, maybe it's memories, maybe it's something else. It is from the constituent patterns that they would associate other patterns from which their consciousness would arise. And you can think about this in the sense of sum of equals greater than constituent pieces. And so now, whether it's biological or independent of a substrate, like we think about AIs, right? Or intelligence independent. So imagine you've got 1,000 really advanced AIs collaborating together. I don't even think we can begin to understand what's going to happen next. And I think that could happen here based on our actions. So then the question is, how many times has this happened just in here, like the normative realm, however space-time works? And so going back to one of the four possibilities that the technological singularity from the perspective of humans, for whatever reason, will never happen for us. And there's different schools of thought on whether that is a good thing or not. But if it is accelerated cycles of innovation that are required to avoid a collapse, and however number of time is going to elapse, whereby stuff, you can say information, whatever information really means, is completely leveraged by humans as time has elapsed, that would mean something different would have to happen. Uh, classical Kardashev models. Classical Kardashev models, I haven't had a chance to go to the whole Wikipedia page. Starts with energy, but Zubrin is of the opinion that it should encompass space. I would think that is the patterns of consciousness or awareness. And that's the kind of thinking that I've kind of like taught about in some of my comments, mostly on LinkedIn. It's a bit of a risk sharing that. It's very raw. I haven't really thought about that. and I can't like really model that mathematically right now. But it's kind of like a correlation to Wheeler's participatory, John Wheeler's participatory universe. But if we think about the set of four possibilities, technological singularity will never happen for humans for whatever reason. It's going to happen in the future. Again, what does the future mean? Is the future already here? William Gibson. We are currently undergoing the means and the ways we are inside of the technological singularity, technological, or that's happened in the past. Within the realm of these four probabilities, if we now think about the prospect that there are civilizations on various levels of intelligence, and from a purely mathematical perspective, which ought not to suggest that mathematics is the base for conscious experience, or to the contrary, I'm not going to get into that conversation. Uh, in the book, the How to Create a Mind, Ray Kurzweil does say that, I mean, like he's talking about math and other like his theories, like pattern recognition theory of the mind and what have you. If we now look at intelligence that is independent of the substrate, generally referred to as AI, it's very math driven. You could say it's 100% math driven, because however it works under the hood is all math. And if we just go with that kind of chain of thought and just think of it like just simple numbers, and I don't know anything about calculus, but if you've got some function and there's like this exponential level of difference and all these different areas between the different realms within the function, so you can then expect the function to expand in a, let's say, a three-dimensional reality. And you got these whole clusters of these functions. And that's how I kind of start looking at intelligences or civilizations on the Kardashev scale. Not necessarily in terms of energy and space. There could be a whole lot of life. We just haven't, like, there's just some chatter about finding something that maybe like Dyson spheres. I don't really know. Uh, the details of that research is like come up in the past couple of months. But beyond the scope of energy and space and time, and if we go with the assumption that uh, a civilization would want to compute information, those are two deep questions. What does it mean to compute, and what does it mean by information? But if we go with a kludgy, I guess, um, definition of their doing that, we haven't really, we don't really have a solid answer of what it means by computing. Again, what is the real definition of information? Information doesn't equal binary. That is a representation of information. For us, it could be, in a John Wheeler sense, that the universe is comprised of what Wheeler used to call it from bit. And it's not to suggest that the constituent element of however reality is fashioned is binary, although there's some research to suggest that information, sorry, space and time is quantum information entangled. I have no idea what that means or how that was deduced or theorized. I don't know which one it is. So to come back, um, again, this is the two questions of what it means by computing and what it means by information. And if probability equals does not equal zero, that humans are the only species or civilization capable of making tools at this degree, to this degree, whereby we are now going to have the ability to be able to usher the means to which we're potentially going to have steps towards super intelligence. I just call this super intelligence. Super intelligence and potentially uh, advanced civilizations, or maybe they're already are going to start looking like nested simulation. Like depends, like like I talk about this. And, yeah, it's like all over the place in the 8-hour video, but I'm getting tired at this point. But um, these four possibilities have a connection, I would think, which what was being discussed, and based on very limited um, observations. Uh, I think Dr. Avi Loeb is kind of thinking about this, whereby um, if probably equals that there's some form of life somewhere out there, however stuff works, reality, space, time, maybe there are branches of the universe. I think Deutsch talks about this, I'm not sure. Interpretations of quantum mechanics, relative scale or realms. Dr. Ben Gorzel talks about the search for intra-particle intelligence as opposed to SETI, which is a search for extraterrestrial intelligence. So we could be saturated by super intelligent uh, life forms. It's just that we don't interact with them. It's just a different scale. Or we're too dumb. Or it's pure bliss, or sorry, not bliss, but that's like Gorgel talking. Uh, Pure kind of either selfless love, or what's it called, unconditional love, or indifference at that. There's a lot of possibilities, but just like a ant that you would pick up very carefully, and there's a way to, you put a piece of paper and the ant climbs on top of that, and then you kind of just hold it in that piece of paper without hurting it. Again, if you do something silly and you hold an ant which looks gnarly and it's going to bite you, I'm not responsible, and my group of companies are not responsible. And if you end up creating a super intelligence, then if you wanted to do it by yourself, then I have a video for you. It's called Rupert the Squirrel. You should go and watch it on my YouTube page. The different context, but the message is the same. So again, I'm not responsible. So to come back to the topic, one of these four possibilities are tied in with the possibility that now we're dealing with a probability that tool-making species with normative or higher level of intelligence. What is the definition of intelligence? There's different definition of intelligence. One of the definition of intelligence is the ability to be able to, at least in the sense that we have a substrate which, is like you've got the absorption of glucose as a means to be able to power, um, provide energy to the organ, to the cells, the overall organ. And thanks to biological evolution and maybe some tinkering on part of extraterrestrial beings. I mean, there's no evidence, but humans are so weird compared to all the other animals on this planet. I think this is like Prometheus talking. Anyways, uh, the ability to be able to absorb the glucose in order to have the brain, most probably because of biological evolution. So if the brain ought to be categorized as a pattern recognizer, a cluster of pattern recognizers working together, as a classical Kurzweil, then that could be one definition of intelligence. But I don't think there is one definition of intelligence because intelligence also is quite relative. And we get a sense of this in a lot of different ways, particularly when we observe savants, particularly folks like Daniel Tammet. Um, but on the complete other end, we also see how after a brain injury or something of that nature, the brain has the ability to be able to rewire itself. And I won't go to the whole kind of like, I don't know the extensive kind of literature on this topic, but to come back, I don't think the brain intelligence is fixed or sorry, intelligence is, I think it's relative in the sense there is not one definition of what ought to be categorized as intelligence. And um, but I guess the question prior to was more so, what is intelligence in the first place? And the categorization of this notion that humans are the only intelligent species on this planet is flawed. I won't expand on that because for many reasons, but if we now have, and I talk about this in the other video, if, the late Professor Stephen Hawking in Random Motor had this warning whereby he hypothesized that human contact with advanced extraterrestrial civilization would mean really bad things for humans. But I don't know how he was basing that narrative other than what he said. And I'm not going to expand on that because I have friends in different communities, and I'm sure that was not the intention of the late Professor Hawking, but it could come across as insensitive. Um, I can say, I guess, that when Professor Hawking was thinking about this, he may be thinking that that group of civilizations or civilization that the human and machine civilization is going to come in contact with, it's going to be like same or like just slightly better. Maybe depends how you look at it. Maybe they just have the means and ability to be able to get to the relative nearby vicinity or close, very like here, but they are there are all these gaps in other areas. Somehow, maybe they have these ships, but computationally they're not as developed, which seems unlikely because how would you? traverse the distance if you don't have the ability to be able to compute information? Again, two very important questions. What does it mean by compute? What does it mean by information? But the uh so Professor Hawking wasn't really thinking about, and this is not for me to say this from an egotistical perspective. Professor Hawking wasn't thinking about, I don't think he was thinking in terms of how life, uh, well, he did think about this actually. Very interesting mind. Um, it takes considerable effort to read A Brief History of Space and Time. That book requires your complete, like, anyways, I won't get into that. But there's a documentary Professor Hawking made about, I forget, like it's about alien life, and he's kind of hypothesizing all the different ways life could exist across the universe, not just the Milky Way. And there's like a lot of different life forms, biological life forms evolving in planets where the atmosphere is really dense, incredibly dense, so dense that you could get got like beings that looks like whale floating in the skies. Um, but you also have non-biological beings imagined in that same, I think it was a Discovery documentary. It's probably available on YouTube, or segments of it. So I don't know where I kind of went off on the tangent here, but to come back, this is not gonna go through all these different um, areas. I also don't know how long has it been since I have been recording this video so far. Actually, I don't want to do this because I'm pretty sure this is the tab. Yeah, is it? There's a timer on here? No, but I think this is recording for, okay, 1 hour. I can adjust the times later. So this is part one. I'd have to come back and do part two. But eudaimonia construct is hypothesized to be, and my UPS has stopped beeping. Eudaimonia construct is hypothesized to be a place to enable hope and healing in the earthly construct, provided that the agents that are active within the sphere of these structures are acting in manners that are in alignment with the higher universal set of ethics, whereby don't lie, don't cheat, don't steal, and don't distort the meaning of these commandments is an implicit, or sorry, direct understanding. And you build on top of that. So I'd have to come back and do part two of the video. The idea is really simple. And considering that science is the engine of prosperity and basic research is the means through which science progresses, the idea builds on top of that, builds on the idea itself of the eudaimonia machine, which then is an idea I got from Cal Newport's book called Deep Work Science. Well, I mixed this up with Carl Sagan's book for a second. Was getting tired. Deep Work Rules for Focused Success in a Distracted World. And I'm about to fall asleep now. But I did find a blog post, the sources directly listed here. I can zoom in. whereby it's like a couple of core tenets of what a eudaimonia construct, so the physical construct, the way I understand it, would do, and these five different stages, uh, whereby these physical structures shift the kind of, I guess, the means through which we would direct focused attention is in one of these five categories: inspirational, collaboration, investigation, deep thought, contemplation. I would push back on superficial work. Um, it's like in a Brian Tracy sense, you're at work to work, not for having water cooler chats or somebody drops by your cubicle and like the next 40 minutes are gone. I was thinking about somebody from my previous work experience, others also. Uh, and then finally, deep work. Um, I think there's more to this than just the five kind of stages. And like there's a serendipitous bumping into each other, which I guess would be under like a Venn diagram between these two. Um, well, depends how you look at it. Maybe you are researching something and you need some help investigating a certain realm, and the serendipitous aspect could be useful. So then I kind of tied it with some of the other stuff I stumbled across. I haven't finished reading this book, but this is Make Space: How to Set the Stage for Creative Collaboration from Stanford's D School or Design School. Interesting book. And I'm not thinking about books from Strategizer also. They write good books, and it's just time, right? I think you got to make time. And so these are the kind of thoughts I thought. I spoke a fair bit about Fred Terman from a limited perspective because Terman is truly the pioneer of the Silicon Valley. And there's a talk by Steve Blank on this topic. Um, I would think that the indirect um, contribution that Terman has made to the world is uh, you cannot uh, you cannot measure that. Like it's invaluable, if that's the right word. It's incredible because you, it's hard to imagine a world without the means to be able to build on top of the information age. And I don't know about the history of physics to be able to elaborate on that, but it seems progressively difficult for any civilization to uh, get to the next age and in this normative sphere, whereby if they are in the kind of sphere that we're in, then logic would state that they would want to enter the age of information so that they can then build on top of that and go from there. Whatever comes next. I have no idea what comes next. I'm biased. I would say steps towards superintelligence comes next. But if in the off chance the steps towards superintelligence for some reason increases the probability that however the great filter is really going to manifest, uh, that is playing into the risk uh, towards the expansion of this civilization in the first place. There's like a couple of different moving pieces here. Then maybe a whole bunch of civilizations don't make it past a certain stage in the Great Filter. I'm talking about civilizations here, which, based on what we were looking at a couple of minutes ago, means that, at least based on this rudimentary classification here, it's not expanded, but between like this, this step and this, for some reason, those civilizations end up either destroying themselves or getting destroyed, which would feed into or from the dark forest hypotheses, which I think should be linked somewhere here. Um, as it says, it's a hypothesis whereby many alien civilizations could exist or exist throughout the universe, but they're both silent and hostile, maintaining their undetectability for fear of being destroyed by another hostile and undetected civilization. It is one of the many possible explanations for the Fermi paradox, which contrasts the lack of which contrasts the lack of contact with alien life with the potential for such contact. Then I think it talks about deriving its name from a Chinese science fiction writer, which I think, yeah, I mean, that's what I thought. I think the concept predates the novel, but anyways, um, so yeah, I think this is also kind of feeding into how maybe uh the late Professor Hawking was kind of thinking about this. But I do offer like from my very limited perspective, like multiple kind of approaches from like the kind of set of meditations from kind of steps towards super intelligence and the two-part video that I made, but also with the set of assumptions or thought experiments that um there's like the relative aspect of intelligence, and with the set of assumptions that kind of modifying Jeff Hawkins' definition just a little bit, in the sense that I gotta think about this, like whatever the constituent, like the question of how memory is fashioned is a very interesting question. I don't know much about this topic, um, if at all, much at all, but whatever would be the set of kind of like a correlate, which would be the equivalent of what a memory is in a human system, in any other system, then it is through that constituent element that that being would associate the patterns from which its consciousness or its awareness would arise, which is not to suggest that there's some uniformity with regards to how memories are fashioned. Because clearly, how a memory is fashioned in a biological brain, while within the frame of the biological brain, there may be some common structures that govern how memories are fashioned, but we already see some pretty distinct evidence that how that happens within the framework of the evolutionary processes driving these is quite different, because people think differently and they uh, have different, not necessarily senses, but maybe, but like 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 Danielle Temmet again is a great example that comes to mind. And So unless Daniel Tammet has like, possible like some alien DNA in him or something, or in them, I mean that in an ethical sense, please don't go about sequencing Tammet's DNA without their consent. Uh, but it's like this posits that there's like within the realm itself, human realm, there's already uh, this ability to have the means through which, so there's already this, the how the memories are fashioned. Like there's some other things going on here because it's not just memories from which patterns are associated. It is not from memories through which we, it is from memories through which we associate the patterns from which consciousness arises. So whatever that pattern, not necessarily recognition, but there's some construct happening because Temet talks about seeing numbers as these 3D dancing objects, if I remember correctly. And then he could, I think I'm adding to this. I don't really know how this works, but maybe he can visualize that sequence. And if that is true, then maybe he is then leveraging the visual cortex of the brain more so than traditionally what the rest of us would do when we are looking at sequences of numbers or letters. I think it's mostly numbers for him, but I'm not sure. And that's one example in a human sense. Going back to the senses in the extraterrestrial, sorry, not extraterrestrial, but the realms that are not in the, it's like like going back to the it's if it's a I can't I should not use references from calculus if I don't even know the difference between an integral and a derivative. But if you have a function and this function's got scales on levels, whereby you've got like exponentially different levels of however consciousness or intelligence or awareness boots up, then itchy eyes, excuse me, sorry, then we could again be saturated with intelligence life all around it. Just we just wouldn't know it. Maybe it's in another scale, like level, um, and those scales are relative to each other. And so this is the question. And I kind of built on top of that. I sought to build on top of that. One of the interpretations I had going back to one of the four outcomes, tying it back to the technological singularity, which again is a term coined by the science fiction writer. I think Werner Vinge passed away. I'm not sure. I actually I don't know. But Werner Vinge was the one who coined the term, but again, it goes back to von Neumann. And now the question is if, as one explores the realm of the technological singularity, is it never going to happen for humans? Is it going to happen in the future? And what does the future mean in this context? Is also the question of what does the future hold? And if the future is not predetermined,
then the metaphor of the infinite pinball realm seems to hold true, which is tied with the other metaphor of the groups driven by the noosphere, but largely driven by the herd mentality. And now it's up to us the degree to which we can exercise the intervention by which we can steer the direction of the group. And you can think of this in terms of climate change, safety measures of different kinds, the development of uh, the the folks in the developing part of the world. Now, if you do that using the means by which we've been doing the things the way we've been doing them, then basically the probability holds true, I think. This is not mathematically modeled. Safa Mohtashari is the fellow for modeling this. But if it's this is not an anti-status quo message, but if you're going to keep burning fossil fuel and the glacier is going to keep melting and the climate's going to keep getting wonky and there's like a whole bunch of problems could happen, acidity in the oceans, soil erosion, what have you. Like if these issues keep compounding, then it increases the probability of the metaphor coming more and more acutely. Pro it's going to be more acute. Um, and so um, um, seeing that the likelihood of a supernatural intervention seems unlikely, then probability states that the risk has to be mitigated, transferred, or accepted, or I don't know what else can happen. And there are other options in the sense that there are anti-fragile mechanisms for turning the crisis into opportunities. And so ideas like eudaimonia construct could be of benefit that if a group of individuals help define problems like these, whereby you could have the safe transfer of specific research to folks on, like I don't know how you're going to determine the candidacy, but I think you should keep it. I don't know, like I don't know. I'm going to talk about this from the perspective of the intentions of the actors, and that's a question of education. It's a wider question of education, not just primary, secondary, and postgraduate level and lifelong learning. And but I would think that sim like this is a simple proposition, but it could work. And there's just a section I copied from a template. It's about objectives and key results. So if there were objective and key results for, say, like this, there's a whole bunch of ways this could happen. Say you mine the set of asteroids that you mine, and it helps bring a substantial amount of wealth into the global construct. And say you have the development of infrastructure in outer space, and say you do the things we kind of explored within the framework of this shorter segment today, then automatically you now have a post scarcity steps towards superabundance kind of a reality. But again, there has to be this core focus on education because a reality whereby people are housed and they have quality food to eat and their healthcare needs are met and they have dental care facilities. I'm talking about all the folks on the planet. Again, even if you do all of this is not a guarantee that the outcome is going to be good without the means and ability to be able to provide the ability for individuals to be able to educate themselves. And this is now an ongoing conversation. Uh, what could also happen, though, is what happened in history. I don't know how many times this has happened, but if the group mimetic structure continues to uh, de-evolve, then that would be bad. Um, and I'm not going to expand upon that because I really don't know what the underlying issues are. I have a set of assumptions, but it's the it should be grounded in evidence-based, like like evidence is what would drive the observation versus my assumptions of what could be the reason of specific observations that are noticed. And I'm not going to go into all these wider random topics, but eudaimonia construct was again built upon an idea shared by a security researcher named Dmitry Stefanovich, who I do not know personally. But the idea is interesting, and so I figured that what limited amount of information I have, um, I would make this model. So I'm not going to explain this model in this video. Effectively, this is like a shorter version of a longer video that I made, but I would have to come back and do another video. I think I'll do this if somebody inquires off of me to elaborate on these set of ideas, and I'd be very happy to do that. And immediately, the application of this idea could help ensure a ceasefire reality in the Middle Eastern region right now, which would be the opposite of what we are beginning to sense as of this week, whereby the reports of Houthi fighters now showing up in Lebanon, at least in theory, could widen the conflict. And there's other things that have happened also, whereby there's retaliatory strikes on Iranian, I think it's missile factories or drone factories. Um, and so the evolution of the eudaimonia peace construct in varying forms can be deployed to not just broker a ceasefire, but also takes the steps to equip and train individuals to help them develop high self-esteem so that they show up wanting to serve the world and not our, I hope my words are not taken out of context, because we all operate in these tribalistic set of ways in some ways, with the meaning of tribalistic as in like adherence to a nation state or political or religious ideology or what have you. But if it's not going to be education that's going to help make a meaningful difference in our lives, I guess Prime Minister Tony Blair, I was going to say Tony Robbins, definitely getting tired. Prime Minister Tony Robbins, sorry, Prime Minister Tony Blair uh, summed it up succinctly: education, education, education. And it seems like a dream to think that we could flip realms in our human reality whereby we're acting in this scarcity-based environment. There's a lot to be grateful for, first of all. Incredible achievements we've made, and it's probably the best time to be alive. Because life would be quite difficult 100 years ago, 1,000 years ago, or 4,000 years ago, uh, especially if you were forced to build the pyramids or activities of that kind. Um, Totally random topics. But yeah, wouldn't it be great if, however the economic structure is in the future, that we all were allocating a amount of energy from our contributions, which would then roll up, however the structure of governance is set up, whereby then we would have flipped the whole model to have 1 to 2% of the budget going towards children's well-being and children's education. Because if it's not going to be the investments in the future generations, then what is going to change the reality? And then we go and dedicate another 1 to 2% towards conservation efforts in random order. Then we take 2% of the total energy and dedicate it towards sustaining and improving the healthcare endeavors, dental work, and veterans healthcare, frontline staff. And then we appropriate an adequate amount of proportions of energy towards ensuring peaceful activities, which would be the continuation of the defense industrial base, uh, unless something truly extraordinary happens, whereby all of the functions of how that happens can be had by having steps towards superintelligence take care of that with humans in the loop. There's a lot of different ways that could happen. These things could happen. But uh, with a model, much as it's just a dream, and I'm almost half asleep. Uh, maybe in the future, this could be one of the small set of ways by which we could ensure better realities for an indefinite amount of time. And with that, my message concludes. I gotta sleep. Thank you very much for watching. We'll see you in part 2 or another time. Thank you very much. Bye for now.